It's February 1974 on a small island in the Philippines. A young Japanese man is camping alone at the edge of the jungle. He's a college dropout. He's traveling the world with almost no money, and he has told his friends with complete confidence that he is going to find three things: a wild panda, the abominable snowman, and a ghost. Not an actual ghost, a soldier. A Japanese officer who marched into this jungle in 1944 and, according to almost everyone, never came out. The Second World War has been over for 29 years. Japan surrendered. The empire fell. The world moved on. It rebuilt. It landed on the moon. But somewhere in the trees above that campsite, a 51-year-old lieutenant is still on duty. Still armed, still fighting a war that no longer exists. This is the story of Hiroo Onida, the man who refused to believe World War II had ended. And the strangest part of this story is why. To understand the jungle, you have to start with a single conversation. December 1944. Japan is losing the war badly. A young intelligence officer named Hiroo Onida is sent to Lubang, a small island near Manila. He is 22 years old and he was trained not for hopeless charges, but for something much quieter: guerrilla warfare, sabotage, survival, patience. His orders come from his commanding officer, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, and they are very specific. 1. You are forbidden to surrender. 2. You are forbidden to take your own life. You must stay alive. 3. Hold out until we come back for you, however long it takes. It may take 3 years. It may take 5. Whatever happens, we will come back for you. Remember that sentence. It is going to matter for the next 29 years. 2 months later, American forces take the island in a matter of days. The Japanese garrison collapses. Most of the soldiers are killed or captured. Onida does exactly what he was trained to do. He takes 3 men and disappears into the hills. In August 1945, the war ends. Japan surrenders. And here is where this stops being a war story and becomes something much stranger. In October, planes fly over the jungle and drop leaflets. The war is over. Come down from the mountains. Onida picks one up. He reads it carefully and he concludes, it's fake. Enemy propaganda designed to lure them into the open. And before you laugh at that, look at it from inside his head. He was an intelligence officer. Spotting forgeries was literally his job. And in the world he came from, Japan does not surrender. So more leaflets fall. Then newspapers, photographs, letters from their own families dropped from aircraft with loudspeakers calling their names. Onida examines every single one of them like a detective. And every single time, he reaches the same verdict: forgery. Clever, elaborate forgery. Think about that for a second. The evidence that the war had ended kept arriving for 30 years. And a trained, disciplined, intelligent mind explained every single piece of it away. His unit is 4 men: Private Yuichi Akatsu, Corporal Shoichi Shimada, Private First Class Kinshichi Kozuka, and Lieutenant Onoda. For years, they live like shadows. They move camp constantly. They live on bananas, coconuts, and stolen rice. They patch their uniforms with plant fiber and wire. And they keep fighting. Which brings us to the darkest part of this story. We are not going to skip it. Because to Onoda, this island was still a battlefield, and the local farmers were still the enemy's helpers. Over 3 decades, his private war killed around 30 Filipino islanders and wounded many more: fishermen, farmers, police officers. To the people of Lubang, this was never a charming legend about a loyal soldier. It was a nightmare that lasted a generation. Whatever you come to feel about Onoda by the end of this video, that fact stays on the table. In 1949, Akatsu slips away from the group. 6 months later, he surrenders. To Onoda, this is not a man going home. It is a security breach. The remaining 3 go deeper into the mountains. In 1954, Corporal Shimada is killed in a clash with a search party. For the next 18 years, it is just 2 men, Onida and Kozuka. 18 years, 2 men alone maintaining military discipline that no one was checking. Then, in October 1972, it happens again. Kozuka is shot dead by local police while burning farmers' rice. 27. Years after the war ended, a Japanese soldier had just died in combat, in uniform. Japan is stunned. Search parties comb the island again. They find footprints, cold campsites, and nothing else. Onida is officially declared dead, and that should be the end of the story. Except for the college dropout, Norio Suzuki was, by every official measure, unqualified for this. He was not a soldier, not a detective, not even employed. He was a 24-year-old wanderer who had dropped out of university to see the world. And he had a theory so simple it was almost insulting. Every search party had been loud, organized, and enormous. A ghost hides from an army. But maybe, Suzuki figured, he wouldn't hide from one harmless fool with a tent. So in February 1974, Suzuki flew to Lubang, walked to the edge of the jungle, pitched his tent in the open, and waited. It took 4 days. On the evening of February 20th, Onida stepped out of the trees, rifle in hand, every sense on alert. What happened next is one of the strangest conversations of the 20th century. Suzuki turned around slowly, faced a soldier who had been at war since before Suzuki was born, and said, more or less, "Onoda-san, Japan has been worried about you." They talked for hours. Onoda was polite, sharp, perfectly lucid, and completely unshakable. Yes, he had been out here for 29 years. No, he would not surrender. Not because he doubted Suzuki, but because he was a soldier, and a soldier cannot release himself from an order. If his commanding officer came back and ordered him to stand down, he would comply. Until then, the war was still on. Suzuki took photographs to prove the meeting happened, promised to return, and flew home, carrying the most surreal message in Japan. "I found him. He is alive. And he is waiting for orders." The news detonated across Japan, and the government did something wonderfully literal. They went and found Major Yoshimi Taniguchi. The man who had said, "We will come back for you," was no longer a major. He was a bookseller. He had spent 30 years quietly selling books, while his last order kept a man in a jungle. So, in March 1974, an old bookseller put on his old uniform, flew to Lubang, and stood in a clearing to formally address an army of one. March 9th, 1974. Lieutenant Onoda marched out of the tree line, came to attention, and listened as his commanding officer read the order aloud. "All combat activity is to cease. Immediately, the war is over." The same sentence from the leaflets, 30 years of forgeries later. Except this time, the source was one he was permitted to believe. Onida later said that in that moment, something inside him simply went dark. 29 years of vigilance ended by one sentence from a bookseller. He wept. The next day, he presented his sword to the president of the Philippines, who pardoned him for the deaths of his private war, and handed the sword back. His rifle still worked, by the way. He had oiled it every single day for 29 years. He also turned in 500 rounds of ammunition, several hand grenades, and the dagger his mother had given him in 1944 for the day capture became certain. He never used either of them the way they were intended. Onida flew home to a Japan he could not recognize. He had left a nation of empire and total war and returned to neon, television, and traffic jams. Crowds met him at the airport like a man returning from the moon. He stepped off the plane and saluted. He hated the fame. Within a year, he moved to Brazil to raise cattle. Let that settle for a moment. The last soldier of the Second World War became a rancher. Years later, he returned to Japan and spent his final decades running a wilderness school for children, teaching them the skills that had kept him alive. He died in 2014 at 91. And Suzuki? He found his panda. He died in 1986 in the Himalayas, still searching for the abominable snowman. He went 2 for 3. Now, here's the part historians still argue about. How much of the legend is clean? Onida's own memoir polished the story. Researchers on Lubang argue he must have understood at some point that the war was over, and that admitting it had simply become unbearable. Because if the war was over, then Shimada and Kozuka had died for nothing. The farmers had died for nothing. And 30 years of his life had been a clerical error. Some stories are easier to keep fighting for than to put down. We will never know which story was running in his head. He insisted to the very end that he had simply followed his orders. And maybe that is the real story here. not a man who was unable to discover the truth. A man for whom one promise outweighed every fact on earth. In 1944, his country asked a 22-year-old to give it everything indefinitely. He was the only one who kept the deal. The world moved on. He stood still. And in the end, the last soldier of the Second World War was not defeated. He was dismissed,